So the big news, obviously, out of Washington this week is Trump's tax and spending bill, emphasis on spending. Democrats have been sounding the alarms on what this means for Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, all the while giving tax breaks to the very wealthy. The final House vote came down along party lines. Two Republicans joined Democrats in voting against it. Um, did you have any conversations with colleagues on the Republican side that gave you hope that more of them would get on board? Was there anything the Democrats could have done to block this bill?
I mean, I did have some conversations, but honestly, I was never optimistic that we were going to have the votes to stop it. I have seen absolutely zero courage. There's been no spine in some of these Republicans that have essentially, done whatever Donald Trump has asked them to do, and yet at the same time claim that they're somehow moderate or they somehow care about Medicaid. I mean, that has been I think the most difficult thing to see. I mean, you take someone, for example, in my home state of California, David Valadao. He has more people on Medicaid, or as we call it, Medi-Cal in California, than any other member of Congress in California. Yet he voted, after saying he wouldn't for months and months, he votes to cut their health care. And so if someone like David Valadao or Young Kim in Orange County, these kind of self-proclaimed more moderate members aren't going to stop the loss of health care for their own constituents, I just don't have any hope that what they're saying is anything more than empty rhetoric. They really have no interest in stopping the Trump agenda. And I think they are more interested in their billionaire donors. They're more interested in listening to the large corporations that direct a lot of what Donald Trump's agenda is. And I think it's horrifying to think that less people are going to have health care, not more. This is going to impact the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare, food assistance, which has been traditionally kind of a bipartisan agenda across this country, where young people, particularly kids in schools, should have reduced lunches, that we should feed kids at a low income especially. Kids are gonna lose their federal food assistance. And so you are going to have school districts making the hard choice of having to remove kids off of reduced lunch or free lunch at many of these schools. Many of these kids, as we know, are low income and barely getting by. And then you have in that same bill, not just this kind of redistribution of wealth, which is horrific. You have agencies like ICE, which are being supercharged. I mean, you're doubling the budget.
That's something you've been highlighting, the build out of ICE, you mean?
The build out of ICE,
enormous
people
fund.
should be horrified. I mean, ICE now is going to have more resources than the FBI. Like, if you take the FBI and some of our other, for example, federal law enforcement agencies, whether it's that do gun control or drug prevention, the ICE budget will now have more resources than all of those other federal law enforcement agencies put together. And what I think Donald Trump is trying to do is it's not just his kind of mass deportation agenda, which is, I believe, unconstitutional. It's inhumane. It's a bunch of things. It is also Donald Trump building his own police force, his own national law enforcement agency that serves at his pleasure. And he's always wanted to control the country and assert his own fear and his authoritarian nature as he views himself, this type of dictator/king. People need to realize is you've had law enforcement agencies across the country push back on this, right? You had the large cities, whether it's been New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, say, hey, our police force is not going to engage in federal immigration law. And so what has Donald Trump done instead? He said, okay, well then I don't need your permission. I'm going to create my own national kind of police force. And it's one that he chooses to have them wear masks, and it's one where they're carrying around rifles, and it's one where they're in armored vehicles and gear. I mean, it looks like a military unit, not any type of federal law enforcement agency. And so I think people have got to be very concerned about the ICE piece of this bill. It hasn't gotten as much attention as the others, but it's really concerning. I think that he is going to turn the Department of Homeland Security into his own nationalized police force that he controls.
The bill allocates, as you noted, $170 billion for Homeland Security and immigration, including this $45 billion for detention centers. And that's, again, 10 times the current budget. You were part of a group of Democratic lawmakers that went down to El Salvador after Gilmar Abrego Garcia and a gay makeup artist, Andre Hernandez Romero, were deported. Talk about what you saw there in the detention camps and what we could be looking at here, given the amount of money they have to build them out in the United States and not necessarily rely on El Salvador.
First, it's important that we, I think, as members of Congress, stand up for due process and for the Constitution. And in Robert Garcia's case, obviously, clearly, you had someone that, with the Supreme Court order to bring back to the United States, and Trump was defying that court order. And these are people that are being sent, whether it's Andrew's case, which is, again, horrific, right? Someone that shows up to his immigration appointment that we give him, then we get to essentially kidnap and taken to El Salvador, a country he's never been in, with no real evidence presented to a judge or any sort of ruling by a judge that he should be there. And so this is happening over and over again, and people's due process and their rights are being stripped. We know that people in our country have the ability, have the right to due process, whether they are a citizen or non-citizen. That is in our Constitution, clear as day, in writing. And so, yeah, we went down there to bring awareness to what was happening to, obviously, Mr. Roberto Garcia and to others like Andrew Romero. What we learned there is, one is the Bukele government is incredibly disciplined in what they're doing, right? They're terrorized their country, and there are people that are on the ground that are trying to organize and bring attention to the fact that folks are getting sent down there without any due process, and they're being treated in horrific conditions. These are people that don't have access to an attorney. Oftentimes they're being kept in horrific conditions, little access to water. In Andrew's case, for example, we have had no proof of life, essentially. We've asked for a basic proof of life now for months, and none has been given to us. And people that are sent to these prisons oftentimes are never seen again or heard from ever again. And so the danger now of United States citizens, in some cases, or people that are here legally on some type of temporary work permit or something else, are being sent without due process, then to never be heard of again, essentially a kidnapping. The entire country should be outraged by that. The inhumanity of how people are being treated, and the fear that has been installed in the public in El Salvador is the same type of fear that Donald Trump is trying to install here.
What did you see there, and how do you expect it to unfold here? I mean, mostly they're just making hats that say alligator Alcatraz.
We didn't go in, they wouldn't allow us to actually go into the actual prison to CECOT itself. We've obviously seen images about what happens there, but we did talk to many people on the ground, family members, organizers, kind of civil rights advocates, that reaffirmed what the conditions were like in these prisons. Because CECOT's just one of the facilities that is in El Salvador that's hosting folks, and that certainly has some of these horrific conditions. And so, but we do know, and this is true, it's not just happening in El Salvador, it's happening here in this country. Donald Trump just put a 7-day hold on members of Congress being able to visit a detention center here in the United States. Prior to 2 weeks ago, the law is and has been that a member of Congress can show up to a detention center unannounced and enter that facility to inspect it. That's been the case. Multiple members of Congress have exercised that right now for years. So as of 1 week ago, Donald Trump and Christian Noma put in a new rule. We have to give them a 7 days notice. Now, we're fighting that. And we're going to be fighting that in the courts. And certainly we're pushing that. That is unconstitutional. But we're now showing up to these detention centers and are being denied entry and are being told we need to give them a 7-day notice. So what are they hiding where we can't do these visits anymore? And what we do know is, in the prior visits that members have made, we have talked to people in these detention centers in the United States, not El Salvador, that are not well fed. They've had no access to an attorney, have had their due rights violated, and they're scared that they're in there and afraid they're not going to get out and ever see their families again. And in some cases, U.S. citizens we know have been sent to these places. And so this is what we're dealing with right now. And I think more people need to understand that this horrific budget is, yes, going to do horrible things on healthcare and taxes, but what it does on the kind of detainment of people and the destruction of people's due rights process through the courts, I think is something just as scary and dangerous.